All right, man, peace. So now I mentioned this story in another video. It's the story of a man named Nearest Green. It was a so-called black man who was allegedly a former slave of a preacher named Dan Call. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Nearest Green, whose real name was Nathan, was the creator of the distillation process that is used in the world-famous Jack Daniel's whiskey. They finally decided to bring his story to the forefront and acknowledge that he was the creator of the distillation process for Jack Daniel's whiskey. And of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
There is no mystery about what goes into Jack Daniel's whiskey, the popular drink.
I'm sure there's no mystery to you. You look like you might be a damn lush. You and your boyfriend, allegedly.
Drink has been around for 151 years, and its recipe is on the company's website. But a story about how Jack Daniel began his distillery is only now gaining traction. Michelle Miller traveled to Tennessee to learn how a man named Nearest Green helped make the brand a household name.
I think Michelle volunteered for that story to get her drink on.
Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Good morning. You seem to know a lot about whiskey.
I do know.
Her ass look drunk right now.
Oh, well, good morning. Well, some of the first clues about Nearest Green were in Jack Daniel's official biography, published back in 1967.
That means that since 1967, they knew that a so-called black man was the one who created the distillation techniques for Jack Daniel's whiskey. Let me say this very quickly before I let this segment continue on. And I say this all the time in regards to the so-called black man. You have to research your own history. Like, a lot of brothers ask me questions about what books do I read and things of that nature. Brother, our history, for the most part, is known, but it's hidden. Because they understand that knowledge is a form of empowerment. So you have to spend a lot of your time, and when I say you, I'm just talking about the brothers who listen to my videos and are authentically interested in empowering themselves. You have to spend a lot of your time doing research about these various things, because you will be surprised what you stumble upon. They already knew that this man, Nathan Green, was the inventor of the distillation techniques for Jack Daniel's whiskey. The same way that the so-called black man has invented many of the most important aspects of this society, but they're not going to give him credit for that. The same way that they know that the so-called black man ruled Europe during the Middle Ages all the way into the 1700s, but they're not going to tell you that. They want you to put in the legwork, and that's how it's supposed to be. Why would this so-called Caucasian man give you free empowerment? Their attitude is that you have to put in the work and that you have to earn it.
Green was mentioned in this book about 50 times. Then his name seemed to disappear until one woman helped discover the truth at the heart of how Jack Daniel came to make whiskey.
It's important to set the record straight, because anyone who accomplished something like Nearest
She looked like that actress. What's her name? Elise Neal.
did should be honored.
What Nearest Green, a slave, did was...
Now, you notice they said what Nearest Green, a slave, did. Every time you study any form of so-called black male achievement, they will always make sure that you understand that the person was a quote-unquote slave. I've mentioned this repeatedly in many of my videos. They will always have that term slave right next to whoever that person was, so that you always automatically associate the black male with being a slave. And as I've stated to you brothers numerous times, the term slave was actually used and applied to the so-called Caucasian from antiquity. The term slave is the same as the term Slav, like you have the Slavic people of Southeastern Europe into Central Asia. That's where you get the term Slav or Slavic from. That's that same word, slave, because those people were servants and slaves to the Byzantine Empire, who were so-called black people. Okay? So there is certainly an agenda to try to reinforce in the subconscious mind of the so-called black man that he has no history other than slavery. That is why when I started the video, I stated that Nearest Green was allegedly a slave, because they'd have you think that every so-called black man that lived south of the quote unquote Mason-Dixon or in the South from Maryland or Delaware on down was a slave, and that's not true. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of free so-called blacks that lived in the South as well. So was Nearest Green a so-called slave? Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. The fact of the matter is that the most important component of his story is that he was an inventor, that he was a refiner, that he was a master distiller. So there's really no need for them to constantly harp on the fact that he was a quote unquote slave, allegedly.
Was Teach Jack Daniel how to make whiskey.
It was on the cover of the New York Times International Edition. It was possible that an African American was behind Jack Daniels.
For them to say it was possible, that means that it was a fact.
And it's never been spoken about until now.
For author Fawn Weaver, finding the proof of Green's legacy has become a passion bordering on obsession.
This is my research room.
Over the past year, Weaver's collected a library of documents, letters, and pictures.
That's a great thing. That means that she's putting in her due diligence. Once again, brothers, that's the only way to find out the truth. You got to put in the work. You can't wait for the Caucasian to hand you back your history. You got to put in the work because the records are out there. I am going to do some videos, historical videos this weekend to go along with many of the other videos that I've done. I haven't done any historical videos in a while. So I said, you know what, let me do some history videos because brothers keep asking me about some historical videos. But yeah, man, that's very, very important. You have to be willing to do research. You have to be willing to inform yourself. You can't look at the so-called Caucasian and ask them to inform you. For the most part, the Caucasian's educational system is based on pretense. A lot of it is based on fabrication. And a lot of it is based on mind control. When I say mind control, I'm not necessarily talking about the so-called black man. I'm talking about their own children. Because they've had to hide a lot of their own history so that they can empower their own children. They don't want their own children to know where they came from. Because it would affect their outlook. It would affect their future. That's why, once again, they continuously use the term slave right in concert with whatever so-called black man they're talking about.
Hoping to parse the truth from folklore.
Finally, one of the elders in the community, and she says, well, you know, his name wasn't really Nearest. Well, his name was Nathan, and he's from Maryland. The oldest letter here is from 1890.
And let me say, there were hundreds of thousands of so-called free blacks living in Maryland.
98.
After digging for over 2,500 hours and speaking to more than 100 relatives, it started to come together.
I got so excited.
Debbie Staples, a great-granddaughter of Green's, had heard the tales of whiskey from her grandmother.
I knew she had no reason to make up a story like that.
In the late 1850s, Jack Daniel, an orphan, started working for a wealthy landowner and whiskey distiller named Dan Call.
This is where Jack Daniel grew up.
Okay. Call teamed Daniel with Green, one of his slaves and his main whiskey man.
And then after slavery, he started his own company, and the person he went to first was his mentor. And he did not see race as a barrier. She began...
Now, brothers, pay very close attention to what the sister just said, the researcher. She was more concerned with pushing the notion that Jack Daniel did not see race as a barrier than just pushing the story about Nearest Green. And this is what I talk about when I refer to many of the psychological issues that so-called black people have. They're so concerned about trying to bridge the gap or the gulf between them and the Caucasian, as opposed to searching out the truth in proper context and being concerned with putting forth correct information. And I'm not saying that she's not doing that. Obviously, the sister has put in a lot of work. But maybe she does not want to cast Jack Daniel's whiskey in a bad light. But really, should the concern be in what context Jack Daniels was willing to work with Nearest Green? It's clear that Jack Daniels understood that Nearest Green had knowledge that he didn't have in fermentation and distillation. For those of you brothers who don't know, fermentation is basically the process by which, through the application of enzymes, sugars are broken down into alcohol. That's basically how you form alcohol. Like this, that's how grape juice turns into wine, or how grapes turn into wine. It's the process of fermentation, which basically is just decay, in which the sugars in the grapes or the sugars in the barley are turned into alcohol. And then you have distillation, which is basically a process of the evaporation of a liquid and then the condensation of that liquid to purify it. That's the process by which you create high level alcohol. And that's a process that has been known all the way from antiquity. All right. So those are the basic techniques that Nearest Green was able to teach to Jack Daniel. And those of you brothers who read the scriptures, you know that those things are mentioned in the scriptures. It tells you about wine, it tells you about strong drink, etc.
He began pulling out all this research.
Weaver soon found evidence in black and white. A 1972 article in the Tennessee Historical Quarterly listed Nearest Green as Jack Daniel's first head distiller. Mark McCallum is the president of Jack Daniel's Brands.
When we've known and understood the weight of this story, all I can offer is anything we can do to continue to honor the name of Nearest, we will do.
Well, at this point in history, many of these mega corporations, they have to acknowledge the truth because there's just too much access to information. As the reporter who's covering this story stated from the outset of the segment, Nearest Green was mentioned in the book on Jack Daniel's life, which came out in 1967. So they already knew that this man, Nearest Green, was a so-called black man. They knew that he existed, and they knew what his contribution was to the Jack Daniel's brand. It's just that right now, in 2016, we're in the age of information. We're in the internet age. We're in the age where everyone knows everything. This is why people are losing their mind at the prospect of the loss of net neutrality and not being able to access certain websites. They're scared that they're not going to get access to information. But that's the same fear that many of these mega corporations have now. Now they have their feet held over the fire in regards to things that they've known about for many years and that they have not made the public privy to. Once again, knowledge is empowerment. That's why they keep certain information away from you. Okay? And once again, that's why people are so scared about the net neutrality, and many of these major corporations that have the most to lose, they're making people think that it's going to cost them their so-called free speech, things of that nature, because they know how people are. They know how easy it is to fearmonger. But there's never a reason to be in fear when you understand how to empower yourself through information. Right? The information is always going to be there. It's just a matter of whether or not you want it.
The company first acknowledged Green as Jack Daniel's mentor last year.
There was an enormous amount of blowback.
Such as?
It ranged from some very positive commentary on the story to some very vitriolic. It was a very tense time in America as well. Then we were into that month or two leading up to the US presidential election. But I thought the last thing that America needed at that time was for Jack Daniel to come out again after all this commentary and raise up this story again.
So in other words, you were afraid that people were going to be offended by the truth. And another thing, this is why I tell brothers not to go back and forth with the Caucasians. See, many of these Caucasians, they come on the internet and they get into the back and forth circular racial conversations. And a lot of so-called black people, particularly black men, a lot of brothers fall prey to it. A lot of brothers fall prey to trying to prove something to the Caucasian. The reason why the admission that Nearest Green was the inventor of the distillation techniques of Jack Daniel's whiskey, the reason why it created so much vitriolic fervor from many of the customers of Jack Daniel's, who most likely happen to be Caucasian, is because it came from the company itself. See, had it come from so-called black people, they could have said, "Oh, that's a lie. That's just Afrocentrists trying to change history," all this other silliness. But when it comes from a Caucasian source, then they can't refute it. Okay? That's where the anger really came from. Is that sense of it being from a whistleblower. It's the same reason why so many so-called black women were upset with Shahrazad Ali's book. People don't like it when a certain truth is brought out by someone from their own demographic who they feel like is supposed to be quote unquote on their side. So that was a major strategic blow to Jack Daniels when this information came out, and they realized that eventually they were going to have to acknowledge it.
People had been saying this for a very long time, but there was not one shred of proof. And so if you have a story that you know will be controversial, because most people don't listen to the whole story.
What do they hear?
People hear what they want to hear. I'll finish that for you. I know that for a fact. People hear exactly whatever the hell they want to hear. I know that just from having this little channel, just making these little videos. People come and they just hear whatever the hell they want to hear to keep their own little personal narrative going most of the time. All right. Now, you also have people who listen and they take in the empirical data, the facts, and they can disagree with intelligence, meaning they can say, well, this is why I disagree. Boom, 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 boom. But then you have a certain demographic of people who hear whatever the hell they want to hear. And either what you're saying is going along with a narrative that they like, or it's going along with a narrative that they disagree with, and they're going to respond back with emotional nonsense.
Immediately, Jack Daniel had slaves.
By all accounts, he did not. It is believed that Daniel opened his distillery in 1866, a year after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. And working with Daniel helped to make Green and his children wealthier than many of their white neighbors.
Those are the distillation, that's the distillation machinery right there. As you brothers could see, as I already explained a little earlier in this clip, distillation is just basically a process where they cause evaporation of the liquid and then condensation of it, which causes a more pure taste to the whiskey. I mean, they even distill water, so that process is used in various forms of beverages, not just whiskey.
These are our master distillers.
Today, Green is mentioned in tours of the distillery.
That's Jack Daniel himself, and this is his crew back in the early 1900s.
There's no known photograph of Nearest Green, but this is his son George sitting right next to Jack Daniel at a time when black employees were often relegated to the back. 3 living Green descendants still work at the distillery, including Staples.
It means a lot to me to know that now the world will know. Our country is divided. I know there's a lot of hate going, but you know, to be in the South and to have a relationship with someone that you would think that would never happen.
Despite the deep racial divides of the American South in the 19th century, an improbable friendship brewed, one at the heart of a quintessentially American brand.
Now, see how they tried to end the segment and put a nice little bow tie on it and make it like Nearest Green was just a great friend of Jack Daniel? I'm not saying that they were not friendly or even friends, but one must wonder if Nearest Green was anything other than a so-called black man. Would the main crux of the story be that they transcended racial barriers and that they were buddies, or would it be, wow, you know, the descendants of this person should be heavily compensated because of their ancestors' contribution to this distillation process, which basically has made Jack Daniels a multi-million-dollar corporation. The sister who was in the segment a few seconds ago who was crying, I wonder if she has considered maybe approaching some form of a lawyer to see if there's any compensation that she could possibly receive. Because as it's already been proven, her ancestor is the one who came up with the process of fermentation and distillation for Jack Daniel whiskey. That's where her mind should be at, and that's really what the crux of this segment should be.
And
For me, this project ends when I can go anywhere around the world and say Nearest Green, and people know who he is. I have never lived in this type of climate of race.
You haven't? Then you must have had your eyes closed until the last couple years. You have a certain segment of so-called black people in America who seem to think that race has become a bigger topic than it's always been in the last couple of years. And that's really just because of how their minds have been manipulated by the media to think that things are suddenly more racialized. If anything, to be quite frank with you, I think that race is less of an issue now than it's ever been. And it's still a huge issue. But compared to the 80s or the early 90s, no, come on. It's definitely better than it's ever been. It's just that due to the information age that we live in, we're privy to things that we never knew about before. You never knew if a man was getting harassed by the cops in Minneapolis 20 years ago, but you know now. So things have not really changed. It's just our access to information has changed, which changes our perspective.
And when I look at this story, this is the one story that's giving me hope through everything else.
Weaver hopes to honor Green's legacy by building a memorial park, republishing Jack Daniel's biography, and then creating this new whiskey. It's called Uncle Nearest, and the proceeds will go toward a scholarship fund for the Green's living descendants. And
that's nice. That's a start. But the amount of money that they're going to make off this Uncle Nearest line is going to more than make up for however much money they spend sending a few of his descendants to some university.
And to support the Nearest Green Foundation's various efforts. There is so much about that relationship between these two men that just astounded me. And one of the things that came out of this story was how Jack Daniel treated his black and white workers. And he paid them essentially, according to Fawn Weaver and according to the distillery, he paid them the same wage for the same work.
Wow.
And
back
it was,
then.
yes, back then. And it was based on tenure.
Wow.
How long you had been with the company.
I saw it.
So you ready to give him you ready to give him a cookie just for being a good boss? That's basically what you're telling me. I got you.
Admire Fawn Weaver. I'm thinking, boy, if you needed an investigation, we need.
Exactly. She deserves more credit than anything. I'm just not crazy about, some of her perspectives, but her research is definitely top notch.
We need to call her with the pretty eyes.
I know.
All the work that she's done. That's an amazing story.
She's a passionate young woman.
Yeah,
no wonder her dad was the author of Love Child from Motown. Can you believe that?
Action.
Such an incredible story.
Can you buy this? Is this available?
Yes, it is.
Look at this lush. Let's get back to the whiskey. Me and my boyfriend are about to celebrate our anniversary. Where can I get that?
It is available, so go out and take a
She's terrific. What we learned from
available
spending
right
time
there.
in history.
Right
Yeah, she's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Look at Nora O'Donnell, fake ass. It's terrific. It's just amazing when we learn about history. And imagine that, having a big black man who knows how to make whiskey from scratch. What more can a girl ask? I mean, let's go to commercial. But anyway, that's the story on Nearest Green. And believe me, brothers, that's just one little factoid. That's like a grain of sand on the beach in regards to so much of the history that is hidden. But anyway, peace.